Hello everybody, welcome to episode 5 of making an online Pokemon game in GameMaker. So the two things we need to work on today is disconnection and wrapping up this buffer stuff in a nice little package inside the network class instead of the server class. So first, this disconnect should be pretty easy. All we have to do is for var equals 0, I is less than, and we can just copy this right here. This for loop in the connection, it's basically the exact same thing. The only difference is instead of saying if sockets I equals none, we're going to say if sockets I equals n socket. What we're going to do is we're just going to set sockets sockets I equals no one, and that should be everything we need for that. Let's test it out and run it. So we'll run the server, run a client. This connected on 0. If I run another client, it connected on 1. However, if I run execute again, normally it would do client or socket 2. But if I disconnect this guy first, socket 0 should now become available. So when I execute, he should connect on socket 0. The question now is, if I execute again, it should be 2. And if I disconnect 1 and I connect, it connects on 1 now. If I remove 1 again and, I don't know, connect on 1. Okay, everything seems to be working just fine. So once I disconnect everybody, everything should be disconnected. We could log it out too and say, hey, this is the guy that's disconnecting, but this is fine. This works. Everyone should be getting removed properly now. I mean, yep, it was just that simple. So let's get working on packaging this up. So if I come into the network here, this little class, I kind of want it to be in here because the buffer is going to be used by the client and the server, depending on who it is. So I don't want to create a buffer for both of them. We only need to create one buffer. And how are we going to do that? We're going to create a buffer in the network, and we'll just say buffer create, just like before. In fact, I could copy it, but I'm going to redo it anyway. 1024. Buffer grow and an alignment of 1. Whoa. Alright, and now how do I want this UI, this package to work? I think I want to do network begin. So I'll begin with an identification, a value. So let's start with that, I suppose. We'll create a function called begin. Ooh, we can't use begin. We'll do start and end then, because end is taken too. So what functions names can we use? It's always the hardest part with programming is coming up with function names, if you didn't know. I guess we'll do start and we'll do send for the end. So yeah, that's what we'll do. So start is a function, so we'll say function start. That's how I'm doing it, right? That's how I just want to make sure I'm writing the names the same. So no, I'm actually doing function name equals whatever. So I want to be consistent with that. So we'll say start equals a function. And here I will pass in a type. So what type of value are we sending? And then we'll need another one for data equals a function. So we'll do network dot, no, we'll do, yeah, data. We'll do data, no, I want to do right again. So we'll just keep it at right. Again, naming, hard part. Size, or I guess we can do type again. Type and the data itself. And then the last function we want is send equals a function. Type, data, and I guess we could actually do a read equals a function. And type. Do I need this? I don't know if I really need this. We'll see how things turn out. Yeah, I like this. Okay, this will be fine. So here under start, we need to do two things. Buffer seek start. And actually we need to pass in the buffer first. So buffer seek start and a padding of 0. We can do a buffer write. So every single message that we send from either the client to the server or the server to the client needs to be primed with a type. This is going to be the identification of what type of message we send. In fact, I'll rename this to message type. And the type is going to be probably a U16, unsigned 16, yeah, because we want more than 255 just in case. I don't know. It may be difficult for us to get to that, but for now, that's what we'll do. So buffer U16, message type. Yeah, we'll stick with an U8, I guess. If we need more for this, we'll put more. And then the message type, which is the data. Under the write, we're going to do this. Buffer write, the buffer, U8, and the data. Oh, not buffer U8. It's going to be type, then data. Read is going to be a little more involved. So we'll look at that in a second. And then send is just going to be network send packets. And I don't know why I wrote type and data here. This should be the receiver, or I guess we do the socket. Yeah, the socket. And then under here, I can write socket is going to be the socket. The buffer ID will be our buffer, and our size will be buffer tell buffer. So basically everything we have in the server, except now it's in the network. So if we come to the server, first of all, we can get rid of the server's buffer here. Just get rid of that line. And if we scroll down to here, these 3 lines of code, it's still going to be 3 lines of code, but they're going to look a little nicer. Hopefully, you guys think so. So we're going to say buffer or network start. And the type, we're going to set to 0 for now. And then network dot write, and then we need to send the ID, and that should be network, and then network dot send, and who are we sending it to? Sockets ID, and that's everything. So we basically condensed these 3 lines down, 3 lines of code to these 3 lines of code, which might not seem like a lot. Technically, we condensed an extra line here with this, but we just don't see that yet because we don't have any IDs to pass in here. So that's what we'll be doing. And yeah, I still don't know if I really want this to be, or this read function here. I'm trying to like decide in my head how I want this to work. Because right now, I mean, it kind of works fine. We won't be reading out of the global buffer, so we would have to first prime the network with the receive buffer and then read from it. So yeah, we'll do that. Prime reader equals function. So why is this called a prime reader, you might be wondering. That's a good question. We're gonna with a buffer. And then we're going to create a function, or sorry, a variable, I guess, is going to be the reader buffer equals null, or can't do, does null work? No, we'll just do no one. That's because we can't read anything until we give it something to read. So reader buffer equals buffer. There we go. That should be fine, and now this will be set to a value, and whenever we read a type out of this, we will get that. But first, I also want to say message type equals no one, because here I need to say buffer, message type equals buffer read from this buffer, and we're going to read a buffer U8. So what are we reading? We are reading this right here. This U8 should match this U8. So if we change it, we'll have to change it on both, because this is retrieving that buffer retrieving that ID out of the buffer. And I guess we can create a function to get the ID as well, but we'll do that in a second. The reason I want to do this is because we might have more. Ooh, nice loud motorcycle outside. We might want to have more than just the type in the header, because we can consider this the header. And in fact, we can rewrite this to be header, make this an empty object, and say header.type equals this instead. I kind of like this syntax a little more because now we kind of know what it is. We can get the header anytime by looking at the type. And then we don't need to create a separate function for it. So anyway, under the read, we're going to do buffer, or we're going to return buffer read from the reader buffer. Reader buffer, and that needs to be capital B, and the next parameter is the size, right? The type. Yep, there we go. Now under the client, instead of doing buffer seek and buffer read, this buffer seek I needed to do in the network. So if I come back to the network, let's actually add that because I forgot about that. When we prime the reader, before we do buffer read, we need to say buffer seek, buffer seek start, and here, that's the wrong name, right? Is it buffer read? Why is you giving me an error? This takes in, I'm correct, right? It takes in a buffer and a type. Probably because it doesn't recognize that as a buffer. So what I could do is say buffer, yeah, we'll do buffer create. We'll give it a size of 0 and buffer grow and alignment of 1. So it's just going to create an empty buffer basically, so that doesn't give us weird errors. That should be fine. And before we go into the client and read this, which we can do now actually, we need to prime the buffer. So we need to take this end data and give it to the network. We can do that in the object network control. Come into here, and before any of this, I'm going to prime it. So if end type equals network type data, then I'm going to say network.prime reader, and we're going to pass in end data, which is our buffer. Data is a pretty shitty name, excuse my language, but we already did it. This should be end buffer. In fact, no, I'll leave it. It'll be fine. But now under the client here, instead of both of these lines, which I can, I'll just shift them up. We can just say network.read, and we are reading a U16. That's all we need, and I can say var ID equals buffer read n16. I can get rid of these two lines. So now we just have read the buffer, read from this buffer and get it, and hopefully everything should work just fine. Come into the server, it's running, I execute, and ooh, nice error. Would be surprised if I didn't get an error, so that's fine. Buffer read, network object, network control, attempting to read from outside the buffer. So that means either one of the few things. That means we are probably either providing the wrong type here somewhere, or we just didn't write the correct data, which is probably what happened, to be honest. So let's go through the steps again. So we provide a buffer seek starts with 0. We write out the message type, which in this case is 0, and it's a U8. And then we write out another thing to the buffer, and then we should be sending it under the server. We start with 0, write ID, and send it. So there should be two things in the buffer at this point that we sent through. When we come into the network and we prime it, we seek the start, of this buffer. Hopefully that's the correct name. In fact, let me rename this to underscore buffer because this is a temporary variable. I don't want to accidentally trying to read from this one. So yeah, U8, hopefully that's the correct one. Yep, buffer U8. So it seeks to start, it sets the header's type to be whatever we read, and then it continues on after we primed it. So under the client now, we aren't doing anything else with this, I don't believe. So we have our end type. If it's a network data, we get the data, we read it. It could also be that our priming didn't work as well. So like this could have been like, oh nope, I'm not a type data, and then it continued on and didn't prime this, but I don't think that's the case. So let's try it again, see if renaming the variables just worked, because that's always a possibility. It's not though. That is not what happened. Let's look at the line numbers then. So under network line 28, that is where we are breaking at. So network line 28, when we try to read it, and this is happening under the client, I believe. Ooh, don't want to look at that. That was happening under the client, if I'm not mistaken. So the client line 28, yep, buffer rate. I thought I was like, wait a minute, that's the wrong place. So, buffer reader equals buffer prime reader, buffer seek start 0. I guess we should start logging some stuff and seeing what happens. So I could see debug.log, and that's not going to work because it's crashing, but I could do a show debug message instead and say buffer seek or buffer tell buffer, and not the buffer but the read buffer. And so what this is going to do, it's going to tell me am I beyond what I'm supposed to be at. So if I execute this, client 1 connected, it didn't even log anything. Isn't that great? I'm just loving it. Oh, you know what? Of course it's not going to read anything because we're doing this under A/B testing, not under the actual server, which makes sense. So this is happening under client line 3. Client line, that's the 3, correct? What are we doing there? Client line 3. Nothing. It's probably actually trying to say line 3 as in here. So yeah, that's fun. That's a U16. That is what we're trying to write, correct? If I come into here, oh, you know what? When we write, we're supposed to provide a type. Network, buffer U16. I'm a little silly here. Yeah, okay, that was the issue. Live debugging, guys, don't you just love it? ID is 1. We can run it. Everything's working just like before. Nothing's changed, which is great. I love when you do a lot of work and everything just looks the exact same. Anyway, that was about, 5 minutes of debugging just to find out that, oh, I forgot to provide a U16. Anyway, that's why double checking stuff is important. So anyway, now we need to create some types, don't we? So I'm going to come into this network folder here. I'm going to create a new script here. And this is just going to be basically no real code. This is just going to be network types. This is just me a bunch of macros, basically. So I will say macro ID, n for network ID, and we'll just set this to 0. I don't believe you need an equal sign, right? I'm not crazy. So NID, this will be the 0th one. And then I'll do another macro and message 1. So this is where we'll define our message types. So NID will be for sending the server, sending the client their ID. So under the server here, I can say network start instead of 0. We'll provide NID. So we're going to start it with NID as the identifier, and then under the client, instead of just hard coding this in, I'm going to do a switch, and this will be switch on network network dot, and we need the header dot type. And then here I need to say case NID. So if we receive an NID message, then I'm going to paste this in, and we will say set our ID to be that and say ID is this. And yeah, what can we do next? I guess we can send a message directly back. So we'll send a message back from the client to the server, and all we gotta do is say network.start, and we'll send the end message. We'll say network.data, and we'll do a buffer string this time, and we'll say hello from client plus whatever my ID is. I guess that'll work. Make sure to convert this to a string. Alright, and then network.send, and we need to send this to the server, so we can just pass in end socket. I think that'll be fine. Possibly not. We might need to create our own. Oh, well, we actually have our own socket. Never mind. I don't know which socket I'm supposed to provide. Oh, no. Yeah, it's probably just the regular socket, not the end socket. So this should be fine. And under the server, we need to receive that data. So right now we just said got some data. So we can do another switch here, just like before. We'll do switch on the same thing, network header dot type, and case and ID, and message we are receiving this time. So if we get a message, I will say debug.success. Oh, we'll just do a log actually, debug.log, and we will say before that we'll say var message var m equals network.read, and we're reading a string, and I will log m. So this will receive the message, and we'll just see if this works. If I come into here and run the client now, another error. Lovely. Data not set for reading it. This is happening under, oh yeah, under the client's line 3. Yeah, no, that's not the correct line. We've already established that. So what is going on here? Dot data for client line 3. So somewhere the client is trying to send something called data, which obviously isn't working. Let me go to the client and see what I'm doing. Yeah, it's not called data, it's called write. We decided to call it write. That's why. Now under here, if I run this again, it runs. So it ran, but it didn't send a message to the server, or it did, and it really should be end socket. One of the two. Now let's try this first. Execute, and this broke, so clearly that is wrong. The next question would be, did the server actually receive any message? So I can test that out as well by just saying got a message. So now we'll see if we got any message at all. So it's possible that this broke or this broke. So we'll see what happened here. So we run the server, run the client. So yeah, we're not receiving any message at all. So that could mean a few things. End type seems to be working. It could also be this, possibly. NID could be wrong. I doubt that. I very much doubt that. But worth a shot. Nope, that was the issue. Okay, I don't know why. But it works. I mean, I'll have to check into that. Why didn't that work? Why does that break it? So yeah, so when I run the server and then I run the client, it got a message and it says hello from client 0. So the client was successfully able to send a message over to the server, and if I wanted to, I could send a message back from the from here. All I have to do, let's get rid of this got a message. All I have to do is same thing, network.start and message, message. Okay, I spelled it wrong. Network dot write use string buffer use string, or not a use string, but just a buffer string, and this will be oh hello, and network dot send to, and we'll just send it directly back. So we'll just do endsocket to send it straight back to who received it, or who sent it, I mean. And under the client, all you'd have to do is do another case. So case and message. So if the client receives a message, var m equals network dot read, and we're just reading a buffer string, and then we're going to say debug.log m. And there we go. Let's run this, see what happens. Just a quick test, and yeah, of course it's not working again. That is probably because, ooh, the server broke this time. It said not a number, I'm pretty sure. So let's go to the server. And where did I not send a number? Why do you think I'm not sending numbers? Buffer write buffer string and end socket. It's probably thinking that that's not a number. Is that correct? End socket might be wrong. I don't know if end socket is actually provided inside of network type data, so we'll have to check that. In fact, I can check that now. That's a good question. So what is end socket? Where is it provided? If I come into my own network control, and let's open this back up by doing control middle mouse click, and let's open the docs, go back to networking, and let's see what happens in data. So when we receive data, we get a buffer, a size, a type, and a server, but it doesn't say anything about receiving a socket. So it's perhaps possible that the socket isn't provided unless it's a connection. Let's see here. Attempting connection. Connecting, disconnecting. Yep. So we only receive a socket if we are connecting or disconnecting. So under data, we don't receive the socket. So how do we get around that? Well, I don't know why this has an error, by the way. It's very clear outside create. That's fine. Whatever. That should be okay. So what do we do about this? Well, under the start, we need to provide my identifier, which means we need to add that in by going into the client here, and by default we'll give it an ID. So ID, we'll do it in capitalizations. We'll say no one by default. Yeah, that's a bit of an issue. Okay, yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry, guys. It's fine. And then under NID, when we do this, instead of saying var ID, well, actually after that, we'll just say ID equals that ID. So basically what we're doing is we're in the client, we're storing an ID, and when we receive the ID, we are updating it. Under the server now, well, actually under the network, when we start a message, I will say buffer write buffer we'll do a signed 16 this time because we want to include negative numbers, and then here I will provide the ID, and it's gonna be client.id. And I do want this even if we are the server, because in the server's case we'll just provide the value -1 to say I'm from the, or -4 to say I'm from the server. And when we prime the reader, we're gonna have to get this out. So we'll say header dot socket ID equals buffer read, and we'll do a buffer and a buffer S16. So now whenever we start a message, we are going to provide not only the message type, but who is sending the message. And then whenever we are priming the reader, whenever we get the data, we will extract the type and the socket ID. And what that allows me to do is under the server now, hopefully all that works just fine, but instead of setting it to end sockets, which isn't a value anymore, we can say network.header.id or socket ID. And we can't just do that because that's just a value. So this is the value 0. We need to go into sockets, whatever that value is. This is sockets ID or whatever. And that should work out fine, I think. If I run this, and then I run the client off to the side here. All right, so we got a message. If I open up the terminal here, the server sent a message to the client that just says, oh, hello, and everything is working. We're getting to the point where this is also another 30-minute video, quite long. It's not good that a lot of this is bug fixing, but even though we are fixing bugs on screen, hopefully that's helping you guys to kind of see that how bugs happen. You learn more from bugs, from making mistakes, than you do from getting it correct. Not all of us are perfect, so yeah. But anyway, this is working now. I have messages sending from the client to the server, and then from the server back to the client. So we will be using this next time, I assume. I'm not quite sure what we're going to work on. Hopefully something a little more interesting, like maybe we'll get a character moving, or we'll get some messages sending between one client and another client. Because right now it's just going back and forth between the server and the client. But we want to be able to have two and have these two clients communicate with each other, which is actually a lot easier than you'll think. The hard part is really going to be movement. Movement in games or networking games is a pain to deal with because you really do want it to all happen on the server side for security reasons so that you can't have hackers, but I don't know if we're going to have time to do that. So we might just provide it on the client side instead, which could cause issues. So it'll be a good thing to get over with sooner rather than later. So next time, perhaps we'll start working on some player movement, getting it so that we can connect two players to each other and have them moving around in sync. Anyway, until next time then, I'll see you guys later.